to hit record. So welcome everybody. I'm not going to kick off just yet. I'm just going to allow a couple of minutes to let some latecomers join the meeting. It is only 11:01, so we'll be forgiving. In the meantime, if anybody wants to put their name and who they work for and where they are in the country in the chat box, that would be really nice to see, just to facilitate some interaction and see who we've got here. Welcome, welcome to those that have just joined. Hello. Lovely to see so many people on this call. Oh. Right. I think I'll actually start talking and do a little bit of housekeeping. So welcome everybody. My name's Aruna and I am a funding and partnerships manager at the Co-op Foundation. And I am here with lots of my Co-op Foundation lovely colleagues today to talk to you about the Co-op Carbon Innovation Fund. So fingers crossed that's also why you're here today, to hear all about it. We're hopefully going to start promptly at 11:05 to make the most of the time that we've got together today. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Please do keep yourselves on mute to allow clarity of audio. We are recording the session today for those that can't be here, so just please be aware of that as we go through the meeting. It's completely up to you if you want to be on video, so it's really nice to see all your faces already, but we're aware it may interfere with Wi-Fi, so we'll leave that decision up to you. The chat box is there at the moment for you to introduce yourselves, but also for any questions that pop up at all during the session. So we've got hopefully about 25 minutes at the end to answer any questions. If yours is missed for any reason at all, if we run out of time, then you can always email us at foundation@coop.co.uk and Sarah will put that email address in the chat box now just so that you've got it. But just to let you know, if you have any questions about whether your specific project is eligible or not, well, firstly, hopefully the information today will help you with that clarity. But also hopefully you can appreciate that we may not have the time to answer all of those questions on sort of a case-by-case basis today. So what we would say is a really good sense check is for you to have a look at the application questions, which have already gone live. And just have a look and see if you have sort of a natural answer to those questions. And that should give you a really good indication as to whether you're eligible or not. Is there anything else? Yes, just a final note to say that this session, just to be really clear, is regarding the Co-op Carbon Innovation Fund. And if you just happen to be here looking for information on the Co-op's local community fund, then that's not what this webinar is about, but you can go to their dedicated website, which Sarah can share in the chat now. So applications for that will open in spring of next year, which is spring 2022, obviously. And for questions about that, you can get in touch with the Co-op's local community team who run that fund, and that sits outside of the foundation. So that email address can be put in the chat box now. So absolutely no offence taken if you're dropping out now at this point and actually it was the local community fund you were interested in. Feel free to do that if you need to. But I think that's all of the housekeeping that we had, and it is 11:05 on the dot. So if we could take the slides down, please, and I'll pass over to Nick, who is our CEO, just for a brief
introduction. Sorry to interrupt you, Aruna. We've just so a little technical hitch because there's always one. We think we have 100-person limit on the Zoom that we might need to remove.
Let me have a look.
So I think you might be logged into the Zoom just to sort that. Sorry, everybody.
That's okay. Bear with me. As we're recording, should we start with Nick and I will just have a look at this as Nick's speaking?
Yeah, sounds good.
I've not got a pop-up anywhere to tell me anything.
Is it something you might need to do in the Zoom?
I'm having a little look now. So I think everyone's also a co-host. So they should be able to have a look.
Why don't we let you see if you can fiddle around with it in the background, Aruna? I've done this before actually, and I've been in this exact same situation, and I wasn't able to change the limit during my other event. So in the event that we need to repeat this to make sure that we can welcome all of the attendees, then that's perfectly fine and not a disaster. So hello, my name's Nick Crofts. I'm the Chief Executive of the Co-op Foundation. The foundation is the grant-making charity that exists as part of the wider Co-op family. And as Aruna said earlier, we are different from the wider Co-op, but we are deeply connected to the Co-op through our values and principles and our ambition to improve and change the world, an ambition that the Co-op has had and tried to bring to fruition since its very inception, nearly 177 years ago now. Now, we, as we know, find ourselves right in the depths of a climate emergency. And whether or not you were inspired or even angered by the daily news that we saw coming from COP in recent weeks, we can all agree on one thing, which is that action is needed, and that action is needed now. It's crucial for us to recognise the climate crisis as a foundation, and that's why I'm super excited to be here to be able to talk to you about our newest fund, the Co-op Carbon Innovation Fund. And this fund is the brainchild of a partnership between us at the Co-op Foundation and our partners at Co-op Food. And we intend to put the money that Co-op food stores generate from the sales of their green compostable carrier bags to very good use. And of course, as we're partnering with the Co-op on this project, we are after amazing projects that are specifically from the food and farming sector. Now, I'd like to introduce Aruna Bahir, who you met briefly, but also Ella Smythe. They are our funding and partnership managers, and more importantly, they are the supremos for the Carbon Innovation Fund. And they are here today to talk us through everything we need to know about the Innovation Fund, what we're looking for, how to apply, what the processes and the timescales will be, and also, most importantly, to answer any questions or discussion points that you might have. And I'm also delighted that Aditi has joined us today. Aditi is our climate philanthropy expert from an organisation called Impatience Earth. And Aditi has helped us every single step of the way, and we are super grateful for the support that she has given us. So I'll pass over to Aditi now to talk about the development of this fund before we dig into the detail with Ella and Aruna.
Thanks so much, Nick. Hey everyone, really excited to be joining you all today. As Nick mentioned, I'm Aditi. I'm one of the directors of climate philanthropy at Impatience Earth. We're a pro bono philanthropy consultancy firm on a mission to help donors such as the Co-op Foundation learn more about climate change, how it intersects with issues that they already may be giving to or care about, and help them integrate climate into their giving strategy in a way that they can be really proud of. And I think the Carbon Innovation Fund is a great example of that. Our work with the team at the Co-op and the Co-op Foundation kicked off with a 2-month learning journey, which was designed to help the teams unlearn and relearn more deeply about the drivers of greenhouse gas emissions and the potential solutions for these emissions within the food system. These learning journeys were led by experts in the field, folks that have real first-hand experience in the food and farming sector, both from a practical and an academic perspective. And through that kind of 2-month process, we heard from Professor Tim Benton, Professor Matthew Hayek about the biggest drivers behind emissions in the food supply chain. We heard from Dr. Tara Garnett from Table about land use and livestock and the role that they play in climate change. And we heard about soil health and agroecology and community-centered solutions from Abby Rose at Farmerama. And then we looked a bit further afield to see kind of what the funding landscape looks like currently in food and climate. And for this, we spoke to Tessa Durham and Anne Rami to hear kind of their thoughts on the spaces and places where the Carbon Innovation Fund could really play a catalytic role. The generosity and the deep knowledge and expertise and experiences of these folks that we speak to was, for me, kind of really pivotal in helping us decide on the direction of the Carbon Innovation Fund. And it demonstrated kind of through these conversations the importance of placing concepts such as community, diversity, and regeneration at the heart of innovation. And we took away that innovation shouldn't just be limited to new tech solutions, but can also refer to kind of ancestral technologies and innovation in governance and in markets and in policies and practices and in the way that citizens understand food and become better consumers. So with these values and these learnings at the core of this fund, I'm really excited to see how it can play a transformational role in unlocking climate solutions in the food and farming space. And personally, my lens for understanding climate crisis has always been the food system. So looking at how food systems and the agricultural sector can be changed for the better and create a more just and equitable and delicious kind of communities and livelihoods. And so from a personal perspective, it was a real kind of honor to work with Ella and Aruna in crafting this fund together. And so with that, I'm going to pass over to Aruna, who will share a bit more about what we're looking for with this fund.
Oh, thank you so much, Aditi. Sarah, please could you reshare the slides that we have? And also, anyone in the foundation team, could you please share in the chat the link to the guidance notes and questions? I've had a couple of direct messages asking for the link to where our application questions are. So could you just pop that in the chat for those that are looking for it? Sarah, could you just move on to the next slide for me, please? So yeah, Aditi's really spoken to it really well, but it has just been such a learning journey over the past few months. And after talking about this fund internally for months and months, it's just so nice to be able to sort of unleash this and talk to you as potential applicants and funded partners about what we've created and what we're looking to fund. So there's a quick overview on this slide, but as I say, all the details are in the guidance notes. So what we are offering is funding of between £75,000 and £100,000 per project to support work in the food and farming sector, which reduces the emissions of greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. We know that the food system is responsible for at least 1/3 of all human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. And so there's an enormous amount of work that needs to be done in this sector to bring down that stark statistic and create truly transformational changes. I'm sure lots of you will also be aware that food and farming was referred to as the elephant in the room at COP26, or many people are referring to it as the cow in the room, in fact, as sustainable food systems were largely absent from the agenda in international climate negotiations over the past few weeks. I can't say that our fund will single-handedly fix those issues and the need for attention in this sector, but what we are doing is demonstrating the Co-op Foundation and the Co-op's ambition to fund a more sustainable future for our planet. So the purpose of our funding here is to support innovative projects, movements, or inventions which not only deliver environmental good in food and farming, but also contribute to real systems change and can demonstrate a positive impact for people and communities too. We know that cutting greenhouse gas emissions alone is actually quite single-minded, and we want to fund work which looks at things in a multi-dimensional lens, which is why a positive social impact is so important to us as well. So you can see on the slide the areas that we can fund work. So I'll go through each one, and we know that some projects will cover more than one of these. So the first one, farming and food production practices. Can I just check that everyone's on mute, please? I'm getting a little bit of feedback. So farming and food production practices. So we know that this is super broad, but hopefully it means that a lot of projects will fall into scope. So we know that food production can be something on a traditional farm, or it could be growing alternative proteins in a lab. Both are food production, and we want to hear from everyone on this one. Initiatives around regenerative agriculture or agroecology. So we know that these are hot topics at the moment, and although this is bringing back a very old way of stewarding the land and farming, we still class this as innovation. There'll be more on this and a definition of innovation later. Can I just make sure everyone's on mute, please?
You're all right.
Getting a little bit of feedback.
Take you a couple of hours. No, I'm going to find my favourite. It's Colin.
I'll continue. Community supported agriculture initiatives. So obviously they have a really strong social impact as well as environmental, and we'd love to hear from you too. Supporting diversity, resilience and learning amongst
Sorry, Aruna, you are now on mute.
Sorry, I think everybody got muted at the same time. So I was talking about diversity, resilience and learning amongst key players in the food and farming sector. So for example, this could be different or new ideas for farmer to farmer learning groups, or improving resilience through urban farming initiatives, just as an example. And finally, behaviour change. So any project which aims to change the behaviour of consumers, but also perhaps producers, farmers, suppliers, for example, in ways to reduce food waste in the supply chain. So in most cases, we will offer the funding as a grant, but in some circumstances, we may offer funding as an interest-free loan or equity investment by community shares. So you will have the ability to indicate whether you're interested in a loan in the application form. So there's nothing to worry about there. In the first year of the Innovation Fund, we expect to be able to offer funding to approximately 10 organisations. And I think that's the end of this slide. So on the next slide, please, Sarah, I'll talk you through our assessment criteria. So basically, it's the details of what we're looking for when we read your application. So each of the metrics that you see on this slide maps directly to a question that you'll find on the application form. And as you can see below, some of them are essential or mandatory, while others are optional or desirable. So I'll just talk to each of these to give a little bit more information. But as I say, again, there is more information in the guidance notes. So hopefully not too much note taking for you. So the first one is a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So this is really an essential part of your project in order to be awarded funding. You must have a clear plan for the funding that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the food and farming sector. And you must also be able to explain how you know that your proposed project will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So there is actually a specific question regarding how you will know how you know that the work that you do will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And there's lots of different ways that you can do this, and all of these different ways are listed in the guidance notes, but I will go through it now. So in terms of how you know that the work you do will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, you could do one of four things. The first one is referencing existing research that's out there, that's credible and trusted, that demonstrates how the activity in your proposed project reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So fairly straightforward. The second one is referencing existing research that demonstrates how similar activities reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So it may be that the thing that you're doing is so innovative that there isn't existing research out there at the moment, but there's something quite similar that would be appropriate to reference. The third one is referencing an existing real life project, which is perhaps similar to your own, that publicly evidences a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions through their own methodology or verification on their website or whatever, that you can refer us to and say, you know, if they say this, then it makes sense that we also will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, it could be that you're referring to your own or third-party commissioned research that verifies how your project reduces greenhouse gas emissions. If that is the case, then please do also share an overview of the methodology used for verification. But please do be aware that we're not expecting anyone to have a third party to come and check their emissions by any stretch at all. We know that some projects may already have this sort of thing embedded in the programme, and if that's the case, then we'd like to know about it, but please don't think that you need to go away and pay for that. So the next section is innovation, which is also essential. So you must be able to demonstrate why your project is innovative. We know that if we don't do things differently in the food and farming sector, then the planet is going to be on a dangerous path. So whether it's, you know, shiny robots or bringing back old ways of looking after the land, we really want to hear about it. There are 3 ways of describing innovation that we have listed in our guidance notes, and I will go through them now. So the first one is something completely new, and it could be new to your city, your sector, your region, your country, or new to the whole world. It doesn't matter which one. Let's say you've discovered a cow that doesn't emit methane, which would perhaps be new to the world as far as I know. that would be an example of innovation. It could be something that's not new, but is different to the mainstream or status quo. So this can include things like ancient, traditional, or indigenous practices. And this is where things like regenerative agriculture and agroecology practices really come into play. So we definitely still class this as innovation because it's going against the grain, even though it's bringing back something old. And finally, it could be a new or different method of delivering something which already exists. So for example, it could be something like using new technologies to bring together farmers across the country on the issue of climate change. So bringing together farmers is not new, but creating that technology to do it effectively is. So it could be a method of delivery rather than the actual thing in hand. So moving on to the desirables or the non-mandatory questions that are in the application form, there's obviously cooperation. We are the Co-op Foundation, so we are looking for cooperation. So you can demonstrate how you will cooperate with others. And this could be at any stage of your project. It could be from designing to developing and delivering the project, right through to sharing the learnings or benefits of the project with others. But please note that this does not mean that you need to formally deliver your project in partnership with anyone at all. We just want to see some examples of cooperation. Then we move on to wider environmental benefit, again, a desirable. So here we're looking that you can demonstrate further environmental benefits beyond the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So as I say earlier, it's not one-dimensional, and whether this is intended or unintended, it's likely that your project will have wider environmental benefits if it's reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So for example, it could be reducing pollution or increasing biodiversity, reducing food waste, restoring our oceans, and so on. Nearly there, community benefit, another desirable. So you can demonstrate how your project brings benefit to people and communities, and that's beyond the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that is obviously going to benefit all of us. So for example, could be things like local employment, improving food security, improving well-being via public access to green spaces. So every project is obviously going to be so unique here that it's hard to give examples. So please do take my examples with a pinch of salt. And finally, addressing inequality, again, a desirable. So you can demonstrate how your project will particularly benefit those who are most affected by climate change. So this is completely up for interpretation, really, depending on your project and where you're located in the UK or in the world. But would really like to see here that projects can improve the numerous forms of inequality that are impacted heavily by the climate crisis. So whether it's inequality due to income, gender, location, job, age, health, unfortunately, that list does go on, and it really is up for interpretation on that one. So that kind of brings us to the end of the what we're looking for section. So I'll now pass over to Ella, who's going to talk more through the fund, who can apply, and the logistics.
Thanks, Aruna. Hi, everybody. And just a note before I get into my bit, if you have questions and you want to start popping them in the chat, please feel free to do that. Can I ask that you send them to everyone? Our Co-op Foundation colleagues are going to be collating the questions for Aruna and I to then have a look at, because it's difficult for us to keep an eye on them and to sort of speak at the same time. Obviously, multitasking isn't my forte. So if you can share your questions with all, and one of my colleagues will collate them, and then we'll get to them in a few minutes when I've gone through this bit. And just to note as well, we unfortunately weren't able to up the limit of people in the room, so we will be coming back to anyone that wasn't able to make it in, make sure they've got the recording, and follow up with any questions on there. Okay, so looking at the process here and some of the logistics around the fund, who can apply? So we're open to many different kinds of organisations, charities, social enterprises, voluntary organisations, co-ops, companies, partnerships, different kinds of governments. It's really important that you do meet the criteria there around sort of legal constitution, having a bank account in the organisation's name, and at least 2 unconnected people on the board. So we can't fund individuals, for example. And it is also quite important that even if you are a company that isn't necessarily a not-for-profit company, that the project that you're applying for here is not for profit and has a charitable benefit. So any learning or outcomes that come out of the work that we fund would need to be kind of open source and shared, wouldn't be able to be kept commercially sensitive. But just to reiterate that we are able to fund companies who are not charities, that's fine. We do welcome applications from around the world. I did think I spotted a question about that just before. We do expect to fund the majority of projects in the UK, but we will be looking to fund some around the world as well. And within the UK, we do expect to try and fund proportionally across the 4 nations. And just to note that if you are applying in partnership, you would want to make sure that there's a lead partner who will legally receive the grant money and then would be accountable for all the reporting on that. So if you're forming a partnership, you might want to think about which organisation is best placed to do that. And if you've got any questions about that, you can come to us around that specifically. If you're not a registered charity, again, just to note that the work that you do needs to fit our charitable purposes. And yeah, we're just interested to see what kind of organisations are going to come through to us. So next slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. So we've got a list of things here of things that you can fund and things that you can't fund. I would say that the list of things that you can fund is kind of an open list. There will be, there's lots of other things that we can fund that are not listed there. It's not definitive and it is really open. As long as we can see how the things that you're proposing to spend the money on make sense in the context of the work that you're proposing to us. So we're not going to put any restrictions around capital or revenue. If it makes sense to propose a kind of mixture of the two, that's absolutely fine. We would want to be really specific and remind you that the main focus of the activity needs to be on the food and farming sector, rather than a kind of peripheral element of what you want to do. So I'm sure hopefully that's obvious from the guidance notes, but just a little reminder there. And just to note that the things that we can't fund that are listed there are quite definitive. So we can't fund things that have already happened. We can't fund things that are not in line with our charitable purposes, which are actually linked through from the guidance notes. They're incredibly broad. So hopefully pretty much everything that you want to do fits into that. But just to note there, that's kind of related to our own charitable law. We can't fund individuals or sole traders, and we can't fund projects which fall outside of the food and farming sector. So next slide, just whizzing through onto timings. Okay, so we are in the highlighted bit there. We're opening for applications on the 22nd of November. So some of you might have clicked on the link through to the online form and seen that it's not open yet. It will open on Monday. So on Monday morning, if you've already got thoughts about what you want to say to us, you can click on that and fill in your form. You should be able to see already what we're going to ask in that stage 1 application. So if you've seen the guidance notes and you scroll to the bottom, you'll see that the questions are all there. So you can already have a read through. I would say a really good kind of test to yourself is to read through, look at the questions and think, have I got a really good answer for this question? If it feels a bit more like you're kind of trying to shoehorn something in, maybe that's a bit of a kind of point to you that maybe this isn't quite the right fit for you. But those questions are there, so you can have a look now. And if it does feel like the right thing, then we are very excited to hear from you of what you want to do with this funding. So stage 1 applications close on the 10th of December. We know that there's only so much that you can say in the word limits that we've put around this. We wanted to keep it short so that people are not spending lots and lots of time on a first stage application. But if you're invited through into the second stage, at that point, we will come to you and ask for a bit more detail on your project plan, a bit more detail around timescales and budget. A note on timescales, we're not really worried about if your project wants to take place over a year or 2 years. We can be flexible on that, but we do ask that you have started delivery of the work within 6 months being awarded a grant. So you can see that we're expecting to award the funding in around June next year, so at least by the end of 2022 we would expect work to have begun. We've also got an interview stage with our final shortlisted applications, which would just be to get to know each other better. We wouldn't be really trying to pull out too much there, just maybe pick up any extra detail that feels particularly interesting about your project. And just a note on the due diligence stage, that's for us to look at a few different things to assess any risks related to the funding on both sides. So it will be dependent on what kind of work you want to do. If you want to work with young people, for example, or members of the community, we'd ask to see your safeguarding policy. If you're working with animals, we might want to see your sort of animal welfare processes and that kind of thing. But we'll always be trying to be open and transparent with you about what we need and why we need it, and not ask you for anything extra, anything over the top, just the things that we do need. So just a final point about the kind of funder that we want to be. We really want to be the kind of funder that you would like to have. We want to be transparent and open. We want to work in partnership with you. We hope to link up applicants who are successful with one another so you can learn together. And I would say for both successful and unsuccessful applicants, we hope to be able to share opportunities for other funds and support so that, you know, if there are other things out there that might be useful, that we can point you in the right direction. And just to say as well, we're always happy to take feedback on how we operate. It's really how we learn, and we do mean that. We've made a space at the end of the application form for you to give us any feedback about this process, this webinar, how you found the application form, and we just ask that you be as honest as possible. It won't prejudice your application, and it will just help us be better for next time. Or if you've got any particular feedback you want to email to us, then you can do. We try and work via our co-op values and principles, as Nick mentioned earlier, which Sarah can drop a link into the chat for so you can have a look. And we've also signed up to the IVAR principles, which you may or may not be familiar with, but that's just really about being proportionate. So we do obviously need to get some reporting from people when we've given money to check that you've sort of done what you said you would, but we want to try and keep it as light touch as we can, not take up too much of your time doing that, making sure that you can spend the majority of your time actually doing the work that you're best place to do. So that's our commitment to you. So feel free to have a look through those links if that's of interest. So that's all from us. We'll move over to questions now. I'm sure there are loads coming through, and we'll see how many we can get through in the next half an hour.
Thanks, Ella. I'll start by answering a few of the questions while you catch up to have a look at what questions have come through. So I'll kick us off. So we've had a question to see if we would consider aquaculture projects. The answer is absolutely. We're really interested in blue carbon, and just because it's under the water, it doesn't mean that we're not interested. So I would say 100% we would consider an aquaculture project. Another question we've had is someone would like to know if a research institute from Brazil can apply for the fund. Again, yes, as Ella said, we are open to applications overseas, and being a research institute does not stop you from applying. So I would say yes to that one. We've had a comment through saying June is too late to store carbon in the soil next year. The project would either need to go over winter or start the following year. Hopefully that's been covered by Ella just now when she was talking through timing. So we would expect the project to start within 6 months of funding. So hopefully that would take you through to the winter period. Let me know if that's not enough clarity for you. We've also had a question about, will the carrier bag money generated in Wales be spent, allocated, ring-fenced for projects in Wales? The answer is absolutely. So that's a Welsh Government requirement, and we always make sure that the money generated in Wales is spent back in Wales. So not to worry, and we are looking to fund proportionately otherwise. Let's have a little look. Ella, do you want to answer some of the questions that you've had a look at while I catch up?
Yeah, catch up on the questions that are coming through. Yeah, sure. Okay, so there was a question here around the. Sorry, Arun, did you answer the one about the Wales?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, sorry, I just missed that. I was looking through the question.
Don't worry.
Okay, so a question here about the timing. So a year or 2 years. That was examples. If your project wants to take place over longer than that, that's okay. So this fund actually is in its pilot year, and we anticipate that we'll have further rounds of it in the next couple of years. So we are really open to hearing from you what the appropriate timeline is for this use of money. So don't be bound in by 1 year or 2 years. If it's 1 year and 3 months or 3 years, whatever is appropriate for your project, that's okay. But as we said, we would expect to have projects that might run along different times. It's just starting that's the restriction around. We'd want it to have started by kind of the end of the year. Maximum size of charity we will support? No, there isn't. There's no minimum or maximum. We would just want you to be able to demonstrate to us that you're okay to manage that amount of money, but that'll come from our due diligence. So no. We've got a question that's asking about developing community gardens to reduce food miles and food waste. I think, yes, that would be eligible, but what you really need to think about is the innovation part. So you'd really need to be able to express to us why that feels like an innovative thing in the ways that we've defined it. So I say again, if you want to have a look at the questions as they are listed and see if you think you've got a good answer to that question, then by all means, please have a go. But community gardens that are producing food with lower food miles, yes, we'll absolutely consider that. me just have a quick look. Can an organisation apply for more than one project? I would say probably, we haven't made a hard and fast rule about it, but I think it would be difficult for us to fund the same organisation twice. So I wouldn't rule it out, but we can, I would say probably it would be better to apply just once. And for non-UK projects, does the Coat Foundation have any preference on location? No, no, not at all. Aruna, do you want to pick up on a couple of other questions, and then I'll keep looking through the rest of the ones that are coming through?
Yes, no worries, they're coming through thick and fast now. So we've had a question about, would we consider projects working with growers to become peat free? I would say yes, there's nothing to stop us considering that at all, but just to reiterate what Ella was saying, obviously we need to understand the innovation side of that, and obviously there is a clear reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but just to be clear on that one. We've also had a question to know if capacity strengthening as part of a project would be considered as eligible. Again, yes, there's no reason why it shouldn't be, but we'd really love to hear how that is innovative. And again, just to reiterate, looking at the application questions and reading through them and knowing if you can naturally answer those questions will really help you to understand whether things are eligible. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with capacity strengthening. It's a great thing. So we're more than happy to hear you out and your proposal on that one. We've had another question saying we're not directly related to food and farming, but we run a large community building that uses gas boilers and we'd like to revert to biomass boilers. Unfortunately, that would not qualify for this fund. It does need to be directly linked to food and farming, as you will have known from the things we can and can't fund on this one specifically. So unfortunately not on that one. Ella, shall I pass back over to you?
Yeah, pass back to me. So we've got a question here about nature restoration projects in partnership with landowners and farmers would be considered. So I would say yes, as long as there really is a really clear link to the kind of food and farming sector there. And also obviously just a reminder on that innovation piece. And just to clarify on not funding projects that make a profit, I think if there are, it's a bit of a tricky one. I can see your question here. So does that include profit made by the partnership overseeing the project? If there's a surplus made, charities make surpluses and that's okay. It's about private wealth that's generated. So if there's a surplus generated that then can be reinvested in your organisation, we know that lots of social enterprises and charitable organisations do that. And then they reinvest that in the organisation or in the projects that they want to run. If you're creating private wealth for shareholders, that's a bit more difficult. So we wouldn't necessarily be able to support that. So hopefully that that helps. But if, for example, the community or farmers were starting to then make a surplus that they could reinvest in their work, then that would be fine. Let me just scroll back down to a few more questions here. Okay, so a private company looking to research the life cycle of gain meat, calculating the carbon footprint, would you support PhD research funding on this? I think if you can demonstrate what the public benefit would be and why you think it's innovative and why you think it would make a difference potentially to reducing carbon emissions in the sector, then yes, absolutely. But again, just to clarify that any learning from that, so if you're a private company who would be then supporting the PhD candidate, if any learning came out of that, you wouldn't be able to retain that information as commercially sensitive to you. You would have to share that openly with everyone so that that public benefit remains. There's a question here about partnership projects, including statutory bodies. Yes, that is fine, and private sector, that would be okay for them to be recipients of funding via the lead partner. As I said, we're very open to funding lots of different types of organisation. The check there is a generation of private wealth and share, so that's share to shareholders. So community shares we can fund, but sort of private shareholders not so much. So if you were working in a partnership and there were private sector organisations and statutory bodies, you might want to think between you who the best recipient of that would be as the lead partner. And it might be that it's a statutory body, for example, rather than the private company. We've got another question here about an organisation that's choosing their legal entity. And are thinking about creating a company limited by guarantee with that pending. You would need your organisation to have its governing documents in place and your directors or your trustees in place already. So if that's not going to work for you, it might be that you could find an organisation that you can work with, you could partner with, who could receive the funding on your behalf. but we wouldn't necessarily be able to fund someone who can't give us their governing document or show us who their directors are at this stage. And I'll answer a final one for now, and then we'll come back to Aruna. Could an organisation be part of 2 bids? Technically, yes. I think, as we've discussed, is that you could be the lead recipient, although, as I've said, it's probably not. It's probably a bit more difficult for us to do that. But if there's an organisation that kind of does facilitation and would be involved in 2 different things, then yes, I wouldn't see a reason why not. Okay, Aruna, back to you.
Thanks, Ella. We're really blazing through these. So we've had a question: would we see carbon sequestration increase as equivalent to reducing carbon emissions? I would say yes, because, you know, it's, to me, that's just the opposite way of saying it. So I would say yes, that would be eligible. Another question: we're looking to deliver a business support program for food and drinks businesses that contribute to sustainable supply chains and improve the environment. Is this within scope? I would say yes, it is within scope because it's within food and farming. But again, just back to Ella's point of making sure that there is a public benefit there. And that anything that you do is not necessarily, it's not commercially sensitive, and you're willing to share those learnings to make supply chains, you know, around the world better based on what you've done. So as long as you're not tight on commercial sensitivity, I think that would be fine. And finally, just another question I'll answer from me: are collaborative projects eligible, or is the funding for individual organisations only? Absolutely not. We're more than happy to hear from collaborative projects. As Ella says, there will need to be a lead organisation that's applying for the funding. And in the application, there is actually a question that asks you, you know, are you one of a collaborative? If so, tell us a bit about that collaborative. So we're more than happy to hear from collaborative projects. Just a short bit from me, and back to Ella.
Yes, so there was a question that, sorry, we missed before as all the questions were flying in around the length of lease needed for building projects. I think I wouldn't want to put a number on that, to be honest. I think we would probably want to have a conversation with you if you came in. I think if it's a very short lease, as in a couple of years, and you wanted to make a big investment into that, that might be a little bit tricky, because if there was going to be this big investment of our funding into that, for example, as a charitable money, and then the lease was up within a couple of years, then that could then go back onto the open market, and, you know, the use of that building could be then for private wealth. But it's not an exact art, I would say, to kind of put a number on that. So the longer the better, but if you've got a shorter lease but you think you can add real value, then maybe that's something that we can have a follow-up question about. You can maybe email us and we can talk about that in a bit more detail, because I wouldn't want to rule anything out if it seemed like a really good thing to do. But if it's really, really short and there's a risk that that building then went back into private ownership quite quickly and didn't have that community benefit, or wasn't going to encourage that sort of public benefit, then that would be more difficult for us. So maybe the person that's asked that question, if you want to follow up with us separately via the email, happy to have a conversation about that. Aruna, do you want to take them on carbon sequestration as a follow up there?
Yes, sorry if I wasn't clear there. Yes, you would be eligible in terms of meeting the essential criteria, the first essential criteria for the carbon sequestration. So yes, no worries about that. We'd love to hear from you. Yeah,
I'll pick up on another couple that are coming in there. So there was a question about funding available for farm diversification into a learning facility for carbon reduction. I think that sounds really interesting. So yes. And there was a question about the stage 1 questions. So I think that's been linked through. I know there's a lot going on in the chat right now. But there is a link in the chat to the guidance notes, and on our website as well. If you find the guidance notes, scroll all the way to the bottom, the questions are there. So hopefully that's easy enough for you to find. I can see a questions coming in as well about having conversations or advising about individual projects and suitability. I think try and take as much as you can from this webinar, because if there are sort of 300 people that want to speak to us in the next few days about their project, that's going to be really, really hard for us to find time to do. So I think the first thing to do is always to have a read back through the guidance notes, and then, as I said, have a look through the questions and see if you can think you've got a good answer. But if you're really thinking, you know what, I'm still not sure and I really want to know if this is a goer before I try and put an application in, then do drop us a line and we'll do our best to answer you. Okay, I've just had a question here from someone that says, what if some projects we aim to implement regenerative agriculture are outside Wales? Can the person that asked that question just clarify? I'm not entirely sure what that's getting at. We're able to fund projects around the whole UK and around the world. So so hopefully that answers that. But if you want any clarification on that, the person that was asking about Wales, then please do follow up. Irene, are you able to pick up the one around forestry in agriculture?
Yes, forestry and agriculture, that proposal there, the only thing I would say is it does need to be directly linked to food and farming. And it does sound like that one might actually be an indirect link, almost like an outcome of the eco small holdings on the community owned land. So if you want to pick up separately outside of this webinar, I'm happy to, but at first glance, obviously I don't have the details. It doesn't look like it's directly linked to food and farming enough for this fund at this stage.
I think we've got to the end of the questions. If you think we've missed your question, please do drop it back in. Or if you've got one that's just occurred to you, we can give it a couple of minutes to see if there's any further questions. But if not, obviously we can give you a few minutes of your day back. So whatever is best. Can we speak any more about innovation? Irina, do you want to pick up on that, and I'll think in the background?
Lauren, if you want to come off mute and ask me, a bit more of a detailed question, I'm more than happy to answer it. We've sort of got 3 of our definitions that we have of innovation that are in the guidance notes. And that's the way that we're describing it. If you want us to talk to you about your specific proposal, we can pick up outside. But if you're there, we're more than happy to chat now.
Hi, yeah.
Hi.
I guess I was more wondering, because you sort of say things have sort of been done before in a whole new way, like does it have to can it be innovative in sort of the way that like it engages like the community, or does it have to be like sort of, if we're kind of doing something that is not like totally brand new, but we're trying to do it in a way that is innovative in the way it does like sort of outreach or something, like does that tick that box?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the third way that we sort of define innovation ourselves is the method of delivery. So absolutely, yes, I would say that is an innovative.
Awesome, thank you.
No worries.
Okay, just had a couple of questions here. Who's the best contact for the follow-up questions? I think we were going to redrop the email address into the chat, but if you come to foundation@coop.co.uk, and I think one of my colleagues will pop that into the chat now, then between the team we can just pick those up as they come in. So that's probably the best place to do that. We've had a question here asking how we would want to work with grant recipients. Are we keen for lots of press and comms opportunities? I would say the answer to that is we really want to work with you in the way that you would like us to work with you. So there will be inevitably a wish from the Co-op Foundation and the Co-op to present back to the world, what kind of thing we've been doing with this money. If you are happy to get involved with that, then that's really great. If you feel less comfortable with that, or it feels less appropriate for your organisation, then we wouldn't mandate that. There is a kind of very basic set of things that we ask for people. So for example, if you were talking about the work that we'd funded anywhere publicly, we'd ask that you just acknowledge that it was funded by the Co-op Foundation, but we wouldn't require you to do press and comms opportunities. However, if press and comms opportunities also felt like a good opportunity for you to kind of get things out there, then I think we could probably do some really great stuff together. So no hard answer to that, but hopefully we'd want to work in a way that is going to sort of be the best thing for everybody. We've had a question about covering the cost of overheads within an organisation. Absolutely, yes. We all have overheads. I am here using a laptop. I didn't buy it myself. Somebody paid for that. We are a charity. So we really understand that it's really important to have like lights and paper clips and all those things that you need. So what I would say is, if you want to, we should have said this actually, made this really clear. Please feel free to really think about full cost recovery in your budgets. If that's jargony and that doesn't make sense, essentially what that means is when you're putting together your budget, really think about all the money that you need to deliver this. Salaries, lights, electricity bill, paper, whatever it is that you need, please do include that, and don't worry about thinking, oh, that percentage of overheads is a bit high. Well, we'll take a view on that. If it feels like, 75% of your project is overheads, then that might be a bit much. Obviously, you do need to be able to do the work, but please don't be shy about putting the realistic cost of delivering this work, and we wouldn't want you to have to absorb that elsewhere in your organisation. Andrew, yes, feel free to come off mute and speak about Wales.
Good day.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My question is, if we're doing something in Wales, but there's other projects that we want to implement the teaching and the actual practice of regenerative agriculture, would we have to come in like as an umbrella sort of charity over them, or would it be best off them applying individually? Now they are in England. That's the only thing I'm looking at. Is this just for, like you just mentioned Brazil, so I was thinking,
you're probably okay. Yeah, I think don't be bound too much by you. But are you based kind of on the border?
No, what it is, there's different projects that I've done this for years. This isn't new to me. I've done this like 20, 30 years, been into no-dig regenerative, and started up a couple of projects. But there's a few more now, and it's like, right, we need to implement them at them places. My only thing is, like, how am I going to be there, and there? Right, how can we raise it up? The teachings are there, the basic teachings are there, and the implementation, that's what we've just got to get into, put the rubber on the road sort of thing, or rather not the rubber on the road.
Yeah, whatever the green equivalent of that is.
Yeah. Well, would that be okay if like, say there was one in, say there was one down south, say there was one in Staffordshire?
So if you were kind of acting as a sort of umbrella organisation and then supporting all those other ones to do what they needed to do. Yeah.
I mean, they're already set up. But it's just the implementation of regenerative agriculture. How would I go about it from this place here now?
So I think if you wanted to apply as the lead applicant, and then know that those organisations were going to be part of the work that you were doing and what you were going to be doing with them was supporting them to deliver it, then you would just need to describe that in the application. There is a really short answer question that says, where will your project take place? So your answer to that could be just sort of UK wide, for example, or England and Wales.
Yeah, we did a project in Worcester, and it was a good soil project, and it was like, right, we want to be able to implement these teachings, these basic principles of no dig, so to speak, at other places. How can we copy it because it was good? How can we emulate it in other places? And obviously, they can put their slant on it, but we wanted to expand it. We saw this years ago, and like I saw this email come through the other day from you, and I thought, right, speak to her. So I'm really, really happy to speak to you, and I want to see this come to fruition from the south to the north.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that sounds fine. But if you want to follow up on any details separately, then just drop us a line and we can follow up a bit more on that. Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Just a quick couple of final questions coming through. Someone's asked if the foundation will want intellectual property rights on the work delivered. No, we would like this information. We don't want anyone, I suppose, to have intellectual property rights. We would want it to be open source, ideally, on sort of any learning that was generated or shared. So no. Any further questions? No, we seem to have spoken you into silence. So thank you, everybody, so much for listening. If we'll hang on for another minute to see if any final questions come through, or if anyone wants to come off mute and ask anything in a way that's easier than writing it, then please do that as well. No?
Stunned silence. Hopefully that's a lot of information for you to take in, and will help everyone to understand, whether your projects are eligible or perhaps not. Hopefully most of them are, and we really, really look forward to reading your applications. As of next Monday, the application's open.
Any colleagues were not able to attend, please let them know that we will be sharing this webinar. Sorry, Henry, go on.
I'm just a last quick question.
Yes.
Would you particularly benefit innovative approaches to applying cooperative forms in landscape management?
Do you mean as in legal governance, as like
legal governance, cooperative legal governance frameworks?
We wouldn't preference them over others automatically, but I think the reality is that if that's the way your organisation is set up, then naturally you'll be working in a very cooperative way, which ticks a lot of boxes. So it might kind of indirectly preference you just because you're working in the way that we would like. Does that make sense?
It's slightly, we're actually proposing to use the cooperative form as a delivery mechanism, in a similar way to that it's used to manage digital networks.
Okay.
So it's an innovative use of a cooperative form to connect beneficiaries of ecosystem services with deliverers of ecosystem services.
I mean, that sounds very interesting. So if that's your answer for how is it innovative, then I think, you know, we can definitely listen to that if you want to make that case. And then obviously the project itself that would be delivered obviously would need to be reducing the greenhouse gases in the food and farming sector.
Or carbon sequestration.
Yes, but still in the food and farming sector.
Oh yeah, it's all food and farming.
All food and farming. But yeah, if that's your slant on innovation, then that sounds really interesting. So yeah, we'd love to hear more about that if you want to put an application in.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Right, we will let you go, but thank you so much for your time. And as we said, if you have any colleagues that weren't able to get in because of our slight technical hitch, please do let them know where they can access the recording, and we will obviously be updating the website quite soon with that, and we'll reach out to people that weren't able to get in, see if they want to follow up with questions for us.
Thank you so much. I'll end the recording there.